Have you ever mixed vocals for hours and hours only to find out either the beat is too loud and the vocal doesn't shine through, you can't hear what the vocalist is saying, or that the vocal is too loud and you can't hear the instruments? This might mean that your vocals are overprocessed, they're destroyed, and you need to undestroy them. In this video, I'm going to show you how to undestroy your vocals in 3 steps. And if you stick around with me all the way to the end, I'm going to show you one bonus tip that will really your vocals. Let's go. And if you want a free download that fits like a glove with this video, download my vocals checklist. The link is in the description. The first step is to remove or reverse everything. So you start by removing all the plugins that you have applied to your vocal track. Take them away, undo them. The next thing you can do is to check, is there any sounds in the vocal take that doesn't fit the bill? Are there any clicks, pops, cracks, background noise? And if so, a real good tool is the iZotope RX bundle. They have, for example, a noise remover. You would need to shell out a couple of $100, maybe more. But if something is fundamentally wrong with the vocal, such as you have recorded it from a distance or you have recorded it really hot, you would need to re-record. And that sucks, especially if the performance is great. You nail the performance, but you would have to re-record if that is the case. If there's some background noise, you can always remove it with some software. But if it's broken, like really broken from the get-go, you would need to re-record. It sucks, but that's the way it is. Now then comes step number 2, and it's to enhance the vocals. What I usually do here is to use a subtractive EQ in the beginning. So I'll load up an EQ plugin, whatever EQ you like to use. It really doesn't matter. And then you subtract where the frequencies are not that good, because 9 times out of 10, I would guess that your vocal recording is done at your home with less than ideal recording environment. So you would take away some low end. Maybe you can take out most of what lives under 80 Hertz. But other than that, I really recommend you, especially if you're a beginner mixing, you should leave the other bands more or less alone. Unless you hear something weird popping out somewhere in your vocals, you can always use the boost, sweep, cut technique, where you just sweep the frequency spectrum until you find the center frequency, and you can stop there, and then you can cut a bit. A 2 decibel cut is more than enough, I think, especially if we don't want to overcomplicate and run into the same trap that we was in before. Slight cuts, slight cuts. And the next thing I would do is to apply a compressor, and I would compress for dynamics. So I will make sure that the dynamics are sweet and consistent. And I would use a compressor with a fast attack and a medium release, just to make sure that nothing is squeezed too much. The ratio could be maybe 2:1 or 4:1. And then I would just play with the threshold until I got maybe 5 decibels of gain reduction. And then I will load up another compressor, and this time I would have a slightly slower attack and a bit faster release, but not too much. And then I would play with the threshold again, 5 decibels of gain reduction on this as well. And next up, I would use another EQ, and I would slightly boost the top end, but only by a decibel or so. I would really be careful with this. A tip is under stereo out, I would put an EQ as the last plugin in the chain, use a high pass filter, and I would cut maybe up to until 400 Hertz or something. And then I would use a low pass filter and cut maybe down to 6K, bypass and engage that plugin ever so often, just to keep my ears focused on the mid range. And when you tweak the vocal in the high end, for example, just make sure that nothing sounds sharp. If the S's or the plosives start to pop off, make sure to back off with the boost. And then apply another compressor and compress that again, so everything is neat and tight and tucked in. I also sometimes use some saturators. You can do well with your stock plugins for this as well. And my go-to is the Decapitator from Sound Toys, but whatever floats your boat. And this is just to give the vocals some sweet sparkle, and it also compresses the vocals even a bit more and making them shine and cut more through in the mix. And finally, I would put on a limiter just to make sure that rogue peaks are being caught. After the limiter, load up a send effect like this, and load up a reverb. Set the reverb to a fast to medium decay and a little bit of pre-delay, and choose either plate or room. That's my go-to settings. Roll off the high and the low end like this. Just blend it in until you barely hear it. If it's rap vocals, I tend to go really cautious with this one. I don't overdo it at all. I don't want rap vocals to sound too wet. If it's a more melodic vocal, I tend to go a bit further with my reverbs and just experiment on what sounds better. If it's a shorter or a faster decay, it really depends on the beat, on the tempo, on the vibe of the song. And by adding some wetness, you make sure that you connect the vocals with the beat. You can do the same thing with delay. You can have an echo plugin, a delay plugin, load it up in the same way, and you can experiment with 1/8 notes or 1/16 notes, even quarter notes, and just check out what sounds best to your application. Just make sure that your vocal is a bit wet so that it connects with the instrumental. And that's it. That's it for the processing of the vocals. And if you had any value out of this video so far, hit the like button. Step 3, balance the vocal with the instrumental. So you have an instrumental, maybe it's a stereo beat, maybe it's this instrument's bus. Personally, I like to adjust the vocal to the beat, so I like to have the beat at a fixed volume, and then I twist and turn the vocal until I think it matches. And then I load up a reference song. Where does the vocal live according to the beat in the reference? And then I listen back to my mix, and I use the NS10 trick, bypass and engage the EQ plugin that I have loaded up as the last plugin on my stereo output, and I listen back and forth on both of them. I also do the same thing with the reference, so I have the reference loaded up in my DAW as well. And then I listen and I adjust my vocals. Another trick for balancing vocals to the beat is to listen at a really, really low level. And this is something that I learned from UBK, and I've done it ever since. And that's to turn down the level of your monitors so much that you only hear the sibilants, but you can still hear most of the words from the vocals. Adjust the volume of the vocals down until you can't hear it, but you can still hear the sibilants, for example, from the hi-hats. And then you turn the vocals up again until you can hear what the vocalist is saying, and there should be your sweet spot. And that's at least the starting point. And then you can turn the volume back up, and then you can do minor tweaks to taste. Another tip, and this goes especially for dense instrumental mixes, so you have a lot of stuff going on, maybe some nasty distorted guitars that takes up a lot of space. Load up a compressor on the instrumental and use the vocal as the insert and sidechain the beat to the vocal. And I like to use the track spacer for this because I can adjust where the compression is happening. So whenever the vocal is active, the instrumental will be ducked a bit in volume so that the vocal can easier cut through the mix. And finally, what you can do is load up another EQ on the master bus and look at the spectrum analyzer. Do you see any dips? Do you see any peaks? Just to get some hints of what is going on, and try to play with the EQ just to make sure that the overall tonal balance is as good as possible and as consistent as possible. Make sure that it sounds natural and clean, and that you don't have any dips or peaks in your spectrum. And just as a side note, if you have some peaks and you try to turn them down and it sounds worse, don't do it. Ultimately, use your ears and listen. Finally comes the bonus tip that you've been waiting for, that I promised you in the beginning, and I hope it's worth the wait. I think so. But before that, download my free vocal checklist. The link is in the description. And the bonus tip is this. Many times you may have thought that, okay, the mix is good, the vocal sounds good, the instrumental sounds good, but they sound like two different songs playing at the same time. And that's not a good thing. So you want to blend them, you want to mash them together, and that's the bus processing. Process your mix bus. And here's how you do it. Load up a compressor on the mix bus, and the mix bus is the channel where both the vocal and the instrumental is going to. Set the attack for 30 milliseconds, set the release for 30 to 40 milliseconds, ratio at 1 to 1.5 or 2, and then play with the threshold until you see the needle is moving a bit. The magic is in the mix bus, as some say, and if you want even more tips on how to process the bus, because I have a lot of them, check out this video, because here I go through a lot of techniques, not only that classic SSLG bus compressor trick, but I have a lot of other suggestions of stuff you can do on your mix bus. So thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, I really appreciate you, and I hope I see you in the next video. Peace!